Hi, I'm Marshall Hughes, and this is the Logistics Technology Mind Map video 3, Don't Change. As you can remember, in the first video, we did a quick intro into the overall process. In the second video, we had a quick look at research and the steps you might take. And in the third video, we're going to have a look at the arguments for, maybe the arguments against changing at all. And this is a critical area because if it's not broken, don't fix it, is essentially the way. And sometimes the change for change's sake idea can just roll through, or someone in management may see something bright and shiny and go, we need to have this. And it's not always a cut and dried decision. New tech isn't always the best tech. So let's have a look at some of the arguments and some of the things you need to consider before you go through and make a change that you may not be able to undo. So let's have a look. So the first thing is, let's talk about the legacy systems. Legacy systems essentially are the ones you already have. And you may have had them for 3 years, 5 years, 15 years, who knows. So when we're looking at the legacy systems, the existing systems, what is the gap? What are we trying to fix? What's going on? So let's the first thing to do is to assess the capabilities. So we've got this system. Are we fully utilizing it? Does it do everything it can possibly do? So what is your current system actually capable of compared to what you're using? And there's some really interesting questions to ask there around the who, the what, the where, the why. Have the people who implemented the system left? Why aren't you doing everything? What does this button do? Could be an option. Are all the options activated? Sometimes the decision may have been early on in the previous process not to take the full capabilities of the system. So to take the B-level equipment, for example, or to take, depending on which column you're looking at in the SaaS pricing chart, not to take the full-blown professional, but to take the slightly less expensive per month option. So if all the options aren't activated, then what are the capabilities of those ones? What else can this system do that we're not already doing with it? So from a software point of view, you can look at exploring the existing software, but also look at the upgrades to the software. Not all software gets upgraded all the time. We do live in this cloud environment now where we're on version 16.3.2.1, and tomorrow we'll be on 0.2 because that'll be upgraded again. Some software doesn't work like that. Some software may be stuck installed on a system. It might have been done on a CD or a DVD 5 years ago, and we're still using that one. What have they upgraded to? What is that vendor not doing? Are all their emails going to spam because we didn't want to talk to them anymore? It's really important to look at the existing system and see what's going on there from a software point of view. Hardware a bit more tricky because sometimes it's quite obvious the hardware isn't going to work anymore. If you're on hardware that's still using a 2G network and they're about to switch off the 2G network, you probably need to upgrade. There's probably not much you can do. But if not, what are the upgrades available for the hardware? Is there a plug-on, a bolt-on? Can we just replace the screen? Is there a new case? Are there things we can do there with the existing hardware that might be 90% or 85% of the job? And then with these little changes, it'll go back to being 100% available. There's a whole bunch of that, especially with the cost of some of the newer technology coming down really rapidly over the past few years. It may be a decision made to go with a base handset model or a base unit previously. You may now be able to undo that decision and replace it with an upgraded system for little or no additional cost. The other option to look at with hardware is second-hand. Sometimes there's a trickle down of hardware. So a big global player may do a complete revamp of all their tech. And then all their units they were using previously, the hardware they were using previously, just goes either back to the vendor or goes on to another market. And there's a few marketplaces that manage that sort of thing. So large carriers might be upgrading, or the vendor might just be refurbishing units. So sometimes as leases turn over, as end of life or end of initial life, someone changes a contract. The original units may actually belong to the vendor, may go back to the vendor. And while they're not new, a quick refurb, replace a couple of chips, replace a screen perhaps, and the units are good, not necessarily as good as new, but definitely functional. And this area, doing things with your legacy system, if it does the job, is usually a lot cheaper than upgrading to a new one. In addition for that, you've got the lack of need to train your staff. There's a whole bunch of really good reasons that, especially if your workforce hasn't changed a lot over the last few years, and some of them maybe, while they're not maybe old as in old years, become old with the habits, it's going to be a little bit hard to break that. So there's some really good arguments in favour of retaining the system, which is something that no vendor of new systems is ever going to tell you. So it's important you look at this research internally. So when you're looking at retaining the existing system, you still have to plan. So we can't just go, okay, we've made that decision and then we'll just leave it alone for the next 3 years. You still need to be aware of, okay, you've made the decision to not implement, to not upgrade. We still need to plan some scenarios around that. You still need to look at redundancy. How long is the system going to last for? Is the system good enough? What are the disadvantages in keeping that? What are other people doing who've kept that as well? So look for some backups, failover backups, fallover backups. So if something goes wrong, what are you going to do? What's the plan B? Redundancy might just mean getting a whole bunch of extra handsets, for example, because the handsets, you may have heard of the bathtub principle. Usually hardware fails or it might fail really early, and then the rate of failure drops off to almost zero for a number of years, and then you hit a spike at the end of life. Planned obsolescence is another way of looking at that as well. So when you're going to keep the legacy system and you're looking at your scenarios, you need to budget in case you made a mistake. So we put a little bit aside for a rainy day, so to speak. If you've decided to keep the system and saved a ton of money doing that, then put some of that money aside to deal with your disaster recovery, and to deal with the eventual fact that you'll have to replace it at some stage. So here's where you can start planning for end of life for the decision you've made, which again might be 18 months, 3 years, 5 years in the future. But make that plan now, make the allowances in your budget, just so that when something happens, then you're ready to roll and you don't get caught out. Sometimes having to rush to make a tech decision, that's where the problems occur, when I've got to implement something now, we don't do the research properly, we don't explore the existing legacy systems properly, and we make bad decisions. The last area I just wanted you to consider when making or deciding to implement new technology or researching, looking at that, is, are you getting new technology to fix operational problems that won't fix the operational problem? So if the problem in the business is cultural or operational, or there's bad habits, the technology is not going to fix that. In some cases, the technology might actually make it worse, or it may mask the problems, which can cause you greater problems down the track. This is particularly important around areas like OH&S and chain of responsibility. You need to make sure that you're not trying to fix a whole bunch of problems by sort of masking over and painting over. You can't use tech to plug holes in the company. You can't automate a bad system. Well, you can automate a bad system, but then you just end up with more and more of the bad system. And also just that whole argument of just tech for tech's sake. If someone at the board just has seen something or saw a news report about some new technology and says, geez, we really need this, don't be distracted by the bright and shiny. Not all new technology is good technology. And there are reasons why some systems have existed for a long time and are used by everyone. So just be aware of not trying to fix problems that aren't technology problems when you're looking at this area. Again, we don't want you to make a bad decision. We want you to have looked at the risks, been able to justify it, and going through this sort of process and showing future leaders or future management that you went through a concerted process of exploring the ramifications of not changing will hold you in good stead down the track as well. So that's the end of the video on not changing. As always, happy to talk about this anytime at askmarsh.com. Hit me up for a free strategy session and we can talk there. Otherwise, the next video, which is about timing, will be coming up soon. Talk soon. See ya.